All right, hello everyone. I thought I'd put together a quick video to help you out with your work for next time, your D12 post, where we're looking at love and how people talk about love, but also, of course, gender relationships from case study 4 of chapter 5. Now, just remember that chapter 5 is all about transitivity. We can see that mainly as active, passive sentences, who's doing what to whom. And it doesn't have to be a who. It can be, anything out there in the world that acts on another thing. Remember, sometimes those doers are missing, and that's where we should sometimes be suspicious, right? And think, well, what is the ideological work being done here? When we did this in class, we took a look at these paragraphs. Here's a nice breakdown that I came up with in class. So this kind of slows down the talk that we had in class. If I was to lecture or give you a handout, it would look like this. But we can see the passive constructions here. Even here, clubgoers could receive from whom, right? Could go right there. So the clubgoers seem to be receiving from others. So the women are doing all of the things that are criminal or wrong or immoral here, right? They're always up front in the sentence. As the chapter told us, that norms them, in this case, as the ones that may be doing something wrong. And men are always tucked on the back half, and then seem to be almost receiving something or falling off of our psychic plane. All right. And we see similar things down here, but maybe in the reverse. The first time that men are doing anything actually have an active verb. They're right here. They're always tucked away at the end here. Here they are actually doing something. They are the doer, but they're just paying the dancers, and they're inside of business discourse, right? So we're seeing very, very different treatment, just looking at active and passive sentences where we place things inside of the sentences. And we can see that here too. Here's our missing doer. Who's doing the pressuring, right? So again, the women are doing these things, but we don't know who is making them do these things. Men are tucked away in this one. We also looked at this as potentially the only material process, that it's parts of men's belief system. They're just mistaken. They're not criminal. Oops, they made a mistake, but they're not criminals, and they're not labeled as such in here. And so that's interesting in itself too. We're in their mental world rather than in the physical world, which is where the rest of this piece is, the material world. But for a moment, we're in their mental world when we actually talk about things that might incriminate them, right? And so that's fascinating stuff, even if ugly. What we want to do now is retain some of this, but we'll change it a little bit too. So case study 4 in your book looked at, let's see where I went here. There you go. Passivity in women's novels. And it goes without saying that in many novels, women are fairly passive. And in this very, very modern story, very, very popular, is no different, right? You can see what we're doing here is simply looking for active and passive, but I started doing the verbs as well. And as I pointed out in class, the verbs that you'll see here are mainly for Bella, the woman, mental verbs for the most part, and she's being acted on as well. So we can see, well, if they're all mental verbs for Bella here, then she's caught up in the emotional world, right? And that's all that she gets. She doesn't get to be an actor in the world. She doesn't get to be a presence in the world. She's all in her head, right? That's what the mental verbs are telling us. And so just go through and finish this off. Do all the verbs and categorize them as mental or material or whatever they may be, right? Some of these will just be verbals, as we can see right here. And the book is helping you do this, but do the whole thing so you can see the pattern. Once you've gone all the way through and you've read the explanation, you'll get a typical passage from this book, a typical representation of how this works. Then what we can do is transfer to this handout that I gave you right here. And you have a few more passages in pink here, and I'd like you to look at these and see if things are any different. This takes place a little bit later in the book, I believe. And so we could see if things have changed, or if it's still Bella is in the emotional, mental world, and maybe Edward has more agency and can do more physical things, including handling her in some ways, right? That'll be an interesting little study that you put together with your verbs. You can look at active and passive too. Both of those are good. Mainly we're interested in verbs. And are they mental? Are they material? What are these things? You can then, at the very end here, the third section, I kind of pulled a switcheroo on you. And I went with a lot of what should be relational verbs. You are, because this is a way that people talk to each other, at least in fiction, when they're in love. So I thought, well, that's interesting. That would make an interesting study in itself. Amounts of power aside, how do we talk when we talk about love, right? And so then I thought, well, what else? Where else do we talk about love other than in, romanticized novels? And I thought, well, Hallmark cards. And so what I did is I just went online and I took the 3 Hallmark cards that had the most pros for you to analyze. And so we're not really looking for gendered behavior or passivity, as we were looking for with Bella above, because you don't have a breakdown between men and women in the cards. Rather, we're looking at the verb types associated with love, right? Some that we might have seen are here, the relationals. And one that we saw, at least from the case study in the book, is that Bella tends to use mental a lot as well, mainly the emotional, right, or affective verbs. And so we could say, well, is that how we talk about love elsewhere too? So all I want you to do for your D2L post is to complete this case study and see if in some ways the way we talk about love, it doesn't really matter if it's a vampire novel for teenagers or people who are beyond teenage years, or if it's a Hallmark card. Well, how are we talking about things when we look at the verbs, right? There are actions in the world. So are these also relational? Are they mental? Do we see a lot of material when we talk about love? If we don't see a lot of material verbs when we talk about love, well, that's interesting. That tells us something about how we think about love in the world, right? And so just go ahead and analyze 1 and 2 and 3. And go ahead and analyze mainly the verbs. You don't have to look at actives and passives so much unless you feel that that's really significant. Mainly we're interested in practice, labeling verbs, and then doing a study to figure out how we talk about love. And after you've categorized all of these and you've found what they have, you can compare it back to Bella, and you can also just take away what you found as a case study in its own right for the Hallmark cards 1, 2, and 3. And then you'll have an answer. How do we talk about love? So that's your homework for next time. Figure that out by labeling verb processes into the 6 categories and seeing what's dominant. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you soon.